Welcome back to the deep dive. I actually want to start today with a question for you.
Okay, shoot.
When you see that little notification badge on your phone or on your laptop telling you there is a system update, do you ever actually read the notes? You know that little scrollable text box that usually just says bug fixes and performance improvements?
Oh, never. Absolutely never. I mean, I just click update, I go make a coffee, and I basically just hope nothing broke when I come back.
Right.
I assume that is the standard operating procedure for like 99% of the population.
I do the exact same thing. Or, well, I did until we got this stack of documents for today's deep dive. Because we are going to break that rule today.
We really are.
We're going to look at something that on the surface sounds incredibly dry. It is the 2026 update log for the French localization of an accounting software called osFinancials.
Which is also known as TurboCASH H in some markets, right?
Exactly.
I can hear the listeners reaching for the skip button right now, like accounting software update logs, really? But stick with us here.
Yeah, please stick with us. Because when you actually sit down and start reading these logs...
The email chains and everything.
Yes, the email chains between developers, the debugging notes, the translation tables. When you read those, you realize this is not just about code. It really isn't just about swapping English words for French words.
Not at all. It is actually a perfect example of the iceberg theory. I mean, the user sees a button that says save or print, but underneath that button is this massive, jagged mountain of legal compliance, cultural politeness, and honestly just preventing heart attacks when an error message pops up.
Exactly. It is about how code meets culture. And we aren't just talking about France here. We are looking at the entire Francophone world.
Canada, West Africa, the Indian Ocean.
It is a massive, complex puzzle. So we have this huge stack of sources, development logs, charts of accounts, bug fixes. And our mission today is to unpack what localization actually means.
Because as you definitely learned reading this, it is not just running the interface through Google Translate.
Oh, absolutely not. If you did that with accounting software, you would probably go to jail. Or at least get your clients audited into absolute oblivion. The stakes are incredibly high.
They really are.
So let's start with the part of the software that hits you first. The words on the screen. The front end, if you will.
The user interface.
Right. There is a section in the notes here that really caught my eye about the psychology of language. The developers seem to be obsessing over specific words and how those words make the user feel.
Well, they have to. You have to remember the context here. Accounting is a high-stress environment.
Definitely.
If you are a bookkeeper closing the month or a CFO preparing a report for the board check, your cortisol levels are already peaking. You are worried about making a mistake. The software has to act as a sort of de-escalation tool.
It needs to be calm.
Exactly. Calm and professional. Which perfectly explains one of the big changes in this 2026 update. The death of the wizard.
Rest in peace, the installation wizard.
Gone but not forgotten.
For the younger listeners who might not know what we're talking about, can you explain the wizard?
Yeah, so think back to software in the 90s or early 2000s. Windows 95 XP, that era. Anytime you wanted to install a printer or set up a network, a pop-up would appear saying Installation Wizard.
And it usually had a picture of a little magician with a hat or a wand.
Yeah, it was super cute. It was a metaphor from the early days of computing to make things feel magical and automatic. Like, don't worry about the complex code. The wizard will handle it for you.
But in 2026, the developers for osFinancials decided to scrub this out of the French localization entirely.
Totally gone.
Why, though? Did they just lose their sense of whimsy?
No, it is really about professionalism. The notes specifically mention that wizard terminology feels archaic and, frankly, unprofessional.
That makes sense.
When you are managing a multi-million euro balance sheet, you don't really want a wizard casting spells on your data. You want a professional tool. So they replaced wizard with assistant, or just the actual function name. It is about being taken seriously.
That aligns with another shift I saw in the logs. They are changing the term set of books to société, which means company.
This is a subtle one, but it is absolutely huge for the mental model of the user. Set of books is what we call a skeuomorph.
A skeuomorph. I haven't heard that term in a while.
Yeah, it is when a digital object mimics a real-world physical object to make it feel familiar, like the little floppy disk icon for save or the trash can on your desktop.
Oh, right. So set of books references a literal physical stack of paper ledgers sitting on a desk.
Exactly. And the problem with that is it implies the user is just a clerk scratching numbers into a book.
It feels a bit small, a bit purely administrative.
It does. But when you change that label to société to company, You recontextualize the entire software experience.
You aren't just updating a file anymore.
All right, you are managing a business entity. It shifts the user's mindset from data entry to business management. It empowers the user to feel like a decision maker, not just a scribe.
Speaking of empowering or perhaps terrifying the user, we have to talk about Error ID 917.
Oh boy.
I actually laughed out loud when I read the developer notes on this because I have felt this specific kind of panic myself.
Ugh, yes, the infamous canceled error.
Yeah, so in the old version of the software, if a user was running a backup, which is already a nervous moment,
Extremely nervous.
and they decided to stop it halfway through, for whatever reason, the system would just pop up a box that screamed "canceled" with a giant exclamation point.
Which is absolutely terrifying.
It is visceral. It implies a total crash. It implies data loss. It implies you broke something fundamental in the machine.
Right. In UI design, we talk about the freak out factor.
The freak out factor. I love that.
If I press a button and the computer yells at me, my immediate thought is, what did I break? Did I just lose the last year of financial data?
So the 2026 update has a specific directive called the full text rule. And they changed the message from annulé to processus de sauvegarde annulé par l'utilisateur.
Backup process canceled by the user.
It sounds so much longer, though. Usually isn't the rule an interface designed to make things short and snappy? Why write a whole novel here?
To save the user's sanity, honestly. Brevity is good, but clarity is better. By adding those extra words, the system is doing two very specific things. First, it confirms what actually stopped. It says the backup process stopped. Not
Right.
the hard drive, not the operating system, just the backup.
Okay, that definitely lowers the heart rate a little bit.
Exactly. And second, and most importantly, it identifies the agent of the action. Par l'utilisateur. By the user.
It is telling you the system didn't crash, it just did exactly what you told it to do.
Precisely. It completely removes the ambiguity. It is the difference between your car engine dying on the highway versus you turning the key to turn it off. One is a crisis, the other is a choice.
So the software is reassuring you that you are still in control.
Exactly. It is about grammatical integrity and a supportive tone, as the developer notes specifically call out.
That creates a really nice segue into the politeness protocols.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that computers had to be taught manners, but apparently they do, especially in French.
Oh, especially in French. French culture has a very distinct hierarchy of politeness that English often lacks.
Yeah.
In English, can you and will you and do you want to are often used interchangeably without much thought. But in French, the nuance is everything.
The log mentions a shift from voulez-vous, which means do you want to, souhaitez-vous, which translates more to do you wish or do you desire.
Right.
Now, to my English-speaking brain, those sound pretty similar. Maybe souhaitez-vous is just a bit flowery.
It is not just flowery. It is really about the power dynamic and the relationship. Voulez-vous comes from the verb vouloir, to want.
Okay.
In a professional context, asking voulez-vous sauvegarde, do you want to save, can come across a little abrupt, almost demanding. It is very transactional.
And souhaitez-vous.
It comes from souhaiter, to wish. It is softer. It implies the service is being offered to you respectfully. Do you wish to save? It positions the software as a helpful butler rather than a demanding boss.
That is fascinating.
In 2026, the expectation for professional enterprise software is that it should be sleek, polished, and deferential to the user. The language has to match that aesthetic.
I also noticed they changed the button labels. Créé par, which means created by, is being changed to genero to generate.
That is about agency again. Created by is a passive label.
It just states a fact.
Right, it is just information. It describes a state of being. But generate is a verb. It is an active command. Modern UX principles state that buttons should pretty much always be verbs. You don't click a description, you click an action.
It tells the user, if you click this, something will actually happen.
Exactly.
Before we leave the user interface stuff and dive into the nuts and bolts of the math, we have to talk about the Charter plugin. This is a classic lost in translation moment. I really love these.
Oh, the false friend. This is a nightmare for translators everywhere.
So there's a plugin in the software called Charter, and the original translation had it listed as transporter.
Right. Because if you just blindly look up the word charter in an English to French dictionary, what do you see? You see charter flight or a shipping charter, a carrier, or a transporter.
So transporter is technically a correct translation of the word charter.
In a shipping or logistics context, yes, absolutely.
But the plugin actually makes charts, like pie charts and bar graphs.
It has absolutely nothing to do with trucks or airplanes. It is a data visualization tool.
So you can imagine a French accountant looking for a tool to make a graph of their quarterly earnings, and they look at the menu and see a button for a shipping carrier. They would never click it.
Never. They would think, oh, I don't have a fleet of delivery vans, so I obviously don't need that module.
No.
They would completely miss the functionality of the software.
So the fix was simply changing it to graphique.
Which is funny, but it really shows the danger of context-blind translation. You can't just hand a spreadsheet of isolated words to a translator who doesn't understand what the software actually does. You have to know the context.
Let's move geographically now.
Yeah.
Let's go to the mothership of the language itself, France. Because looking at these accounting rules, France does not mess around.
No, they really don't.
Yes.
France operates under the PCG, the Plan Comptable General. It is incredibly rigid compared to what we might be used to in the US or the UK.
How so? Like, how different is it, really?
Well, in the US, we follow GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. GAAP gives you broad principles, but you have some flexibility on how you name your specific accounts or how you number them, as long as the underlying logic holds up.
Okay.
In France, the PCG mandates the specific exact account number for everything by law.
Wow. But before we even get to the account numbers, there was a technical glitch in the logs that almost broke the whole French localization setup. The case of the missing cedilla.
Ah, yes. The tiny distinct mark under the letter C. The file français.dfm spelled with a normal C was actually a workaround because the old system couldn't save the character C with the cedilla.
Wait, so they had to misspell the name of their own language file just to make the software load?
For a while, yes, they did. It was a legacy encoding issue. Older database systems and file structures often struggled with special characters and file paths.
Because they were built on basic ASCII.
Exactly. If the code tried to call français.dfm with the proper cedilla, the system would basically panic, fail to read the file, and just revert the entire interface back to English.
That must have been incredibly annoying for the users in France.
Oh, incredibly. Imagine buying a piece of premium software made for Americans and the language file was spelled English without the L. It just looks sloppy and unprofessional right from the start.
So the 2026 update finally fixes this.
Yes, they updated the underlying character encoding so they can now natively save it as français.dfm. It is a small victory for orthography, but a huge one for not immediately annoying every French user who happens to glance at the file name.
Now onto the PCG structure itself. I was looking at the notes on assets, which is class 2, in their system. There is a very specific distinction made between land and buildings.
Right. Account 211 is terrains or land. Account 213 is constructions or buildings. The source material highlights a really key accounting principle here. Land is not depreciated.
Because land doesn't wear out.
Exactly. Unless you have a giant sinkhole swallow the property, the land is still there. It essentially has an infinite useful life. But a building, the construction deteriorates over time.
The roof leaks, the foundation settles and needs paint.
Exactly. So the software has to handle them completely differently. You have the main account for the building costs, say, 213, but then you have a contra account usually starting with a 28, like 2813.
Can you explain the contra account concept for us? Because when I read that, it sounded like something illegal, like a shadow entity or a shell company.
It does sound a bit shady, but it is actually mandatory for financial transparency. Imagine your company buys a factory for 1 million euros. You record that purchase in account 213. 5 years later, the building has lost value due to wear and tear. Let's say it is now worth 900,000.
Okay, tracking with you.
You could technically just erase the 1 million and write 900,000 in the ledger.
But then you lose the record of what you originally paid for it.
Exactly. You destroy the financial history, and accountants hate destroying history. Everything needs an audit trail. So instead, you create a shadow account, a contra account that sits right next to it, account 2813.
So they live side by side.
Yes. You record the depreciation there as a negative number. So on the balance sheet, you see original cost 1 million minus accumulated depreciation, 100,000 equals net book value, 900,000.
So the software update was really about ensuring these specific links were hard-coded correctly so the math just happens automatically in the background.
Correct. The user shouldn't have to manually calculate or link the building and its shadow account. The software should just inherently know if this is a building account, it legally requires a shadow account for depreciation.
And then we enter the absolute labyrinth of the TVA, the value-added tax.
The pride and joy of the French fiscal system, and the absolute bane of software developers everywhere.
The rates alone are a headache to wrap my hair around. You have got the standard rate at 20%.
That is for most everyday things: clothes, electronics, cars.
Then there is the reduced rate at 10%. The notes mention catering and home renovation.
Right.
Then the super reduced rate at 5.5% for books and food.
And don't forget the specific rate or taux particulier at 2.1%.
What is that even for? 2.1% seems so arbitrary.
It is for very specific things like refundable medicines and certain press publications. It is very niche. But think about the sheer complexity that creates for the software.
Oh, man.
If you run a large newsstand in Paris, a single customer could walk up and buy a newspaper at 2.1%, a sandwich at 5.5%, and a little souvenir keychain at 20%. That is one single transaction, one receipt handed to the customer.
But the software has to instantly split that single payment into 3 different tax buckets in the background.
Exactly. And the notes discuss this clearing account concept, which gets into the difference between what the tax man wants and what the auditor wants.
This is a really crucial distinction in the logs.
It is.
Yeah.
The tax authority, the DGFIP, they mostly care about the CA3 box. That is a specific box on the actual tax return form. They just want the big aggregated total. They're asking how much total VAT did you collect at 20% this month?
Right. Just give me the bottom line number so I know how much to charge you.
Exactly. But if you get audited, the auditor says prove it. They want to see the individual transactions that make up that big number.
Which means the software can't just dump everything into one giant bucket.
No, it can't. It uses highly detailed accounts. 445710 for standard rate collected, 445720 for reduced rate, and so on. Then at the very end of the month, the software runs a clearing process that sums all those detailed accounts up to fill in the CA3 box.
So it is a dual-layer system, granular detail for the audit trail, and aggregated totals for the government return.
Exactly right.
The notes also mention something called acquisitions intracommunautaires, basically buying stuff from other countries within the EU. There is this term, auto-liquidation. I have to say it sounds like a sci-fi weapon.
It really does sound like a self-destruct sequence. Reverse charge is the standard English term for it. Basically, if you are a French company buying goods from a supplier in Germany, you don't actually pay VAT to the German seller.
Because it is technically an export for them.
Right. But you still owe VAT to the French government because you are consuming or selling that product in France. So do you just write a check to the French government?
I would assume so.
No. You auto-liquidate.
Okay, how does that work?
You declare the VAT you would have paid as if you bought it locally in France, and then you immediately logically deduct it in that exact same tax return.
Wait, so the net financial result is literally zero?
Financially, yes, the net impact on your bank account is zero.
Yeah.
But legally, you have to report it. If you don't leave that paper trail, you get fined.
That is the ultimate definition of bureaucracy.
It is the definition of compliance. It is what keeps the EU borders open without needing physical customs agents at every border crossing to collect tax on every single truck. The software handles the paper border.
So the software has to automatically create a transaction that charges you tax and then refunds you that exact same tax simultaneously just to satisfy the reporting requirement.
Yes, it is phantom money moving around purely for compliance.
All right, let's leave France and head south. We are going to West Africa. This was the part of the logs I actually found the most surprising. I had never heard of OHATO before reading this.
I think most people outside of corporate law or African finance haven't. OHATA stands for the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa. It is a massive group of 17 countries, mostly Francophone, that got together and decided to completely unify their business laws.
That is a staggering undertaking. I mean, we can't even get all the states in the U.S. to agree on a uniform speed limit, let alone a corporate tax structure.
It is incredibly ambitious. Imagine if 17 distinct sovereign countries in Europe or Asia all agreed by treaty to use the exact same chart of accounts. Not just similar guiding principles, but the exact identical account numbers down to the digit.
So an accountant sitting in an office in Senegal uses the exact same code for raw materials as an accountant sitting in Congo.
Exactly. Under the SAIS-COHEDO system, Class 6 is always expenses. 601 is always raw materials everywhere. 641 is always salaries. Class 7 is revenue. 701 is always sales. It is strictly mandated by international law.
Why make it so incredibly strict, though? As we discussed earlier, GAAP in the U.S. is pretty flexible.
It is all about investment and comparability. If you are an international investor sitting in a firm in New York or London, and you are looking at potentially funding a company in Ivory Coast and another company in Benin, you want to be able to compare their books apples to apple.
Right. You don't want to learn two entirely different accounting languages just to see who is more profitable.
Exactly. If everyone uses their own local quirky system, it is chaos for investors. OHEDA creates a unified common language of finance for the entire region. It significantly reduces the risk and the friction for foreign direct investment.
But even with a common language, regional culture still pushes back against the code. Let's talk about the Burkina Faso case study in the developer notes.
The currency display issue. This is a brilliant example of the classic battle between technical correctness and user reality.
So the official international ISO code for their currency is XOF.
Correct. That is the global banking standard. If you look at a currency exchange board in an international airport, it says XOF.
But the everyday users of this software, they don't actually use that term.
No, not at all. On the street, in the shops, and crucially in their heads, it is SCFA or Francs CFA. So the software developers had a really tough choice here.
Right. Do we force the ISO code XOF onto the screen because it is technically correct globally?
Or do we put FCFA because that is what the user actually expects to see when they open their ledger?
And they went with FCFA in the UI.
They did. The development note says explicitly that technical accuracy sometimes has to bow to user familiarity.
That is a great design philosophy.
It is, because if the software says XOF, the user might pause for a microsecond and think, what is XOF? Did my currency change? If it says FCFA, they know exactly what it is instantly. Good localization always meets the user where they are not where the textbook says they technically should be.
Then we have Benin. Reading through the OHADA section, MENA really seems to be the overachiever of the group. They actually have a dual system.
They do. Benin is an OHADA member state, so of course they use the regional system SESCA-HADA for everyday business. But since 2019, they mandated that listed companies also have to strictly comply with IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards.
So a company there has to keep two entirely separate sets of books. Or is it one master set that somehow magically satisfies both legal requirements?
Ideally, it is one master set that maps to both. But the reporting requirements differ significantly in how things are valued and disclosed. It puts a huge professional burden on the accountants there.
I can imagine.
The notes explicitly mention the OECD Benin, which is the professional regulatory body there. You have to have a very specific advanced degree like the DISCOJEF or DICOFI to even legally practice as a chartered accountant.
It really counters this outdated stereotype some might have that emerging or developing markets have loose or Wild West financial regulations.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't the Wild West at all. In some ways, it is an absolute fortress of regulations. These accountants are navigating a much more complex intersection of local, regional, and international law than many of their counterparts working in Europe or the U.S.
Speaking of things getting complicated, let's look at the patchwork section of the logs, because not every country fits neatly into this OHEDA box. Let's take Guinea-Bissau. This was honestly a comedy of errors in the devlogs.
Yes, poor Guinea-Bissau. The software developers initially looked at a map and thought, well, they speak Portuguese there, so they obviously can't be part of the Francophone OHEDA legal system.
Which seems like a very logical assumption from a desk in Europe.
But it was completely incorrect. Guinea-Bissau is a full OHADA member. They just translate all the French OHADA laws into Portuguese for their local administration.
So the software team had to essentially create a Frankenstein monster of a localization file.
They did. They had to translate the entire user interface into Portuguese, which was tagged as PTGW, but they had to keep the underlying accounting structure completely identical to the French system.
So all the Class 6 and Class 7 OHIDA rules, but with Portuguese labels.
Exactly. It is a totally unique hybrid. You have Portuguese words describing a French origin legal structure. The notes actually show the team scrambling to correct this bug, basically shouting in the emails, it is OHIDA, apply the structure.
And then Equatorial Guinea, another massive outlier in the region.
Right. They are located in the Central African Economic Zone, CEMAC, using the XAF currency. But they speak Spanish.
Spanish?
Yes, it is the only Spanish-speaking country in the entire region. But because of their geographic neighbors, they are deeply economically integrated into the surrounding Francophone zone.
So what on earth does the accounting software look like there?
It is another fascinating hybrid. They use the French account structure, so the bones are OHADA-like, but the tax names are entirely Spanish.
Give me an example.
So instead of the Benin-style ITS tax, they use IRPF Impuesto sobre la renta de las personas físicas, which is pulled straight out of the Spanish tax code. And for Social Security, they use INSS instead of the French CNSS.
It is like an archaeological dig right there on the screen. You can literally see the layers of colonial history.
Yeah.
You have Spanish administration overlaying a French economic zone frozen right there in the variable names of the code.
That is a beautiful way to put it. The software inadvertently preserves history. It freezes these complex historical overlaps in amber.
Then the logs jump all the way across the ocean to Canada, specifically Quebec. It is French, obviously, but it's definitely not France French.
Oh no. If you use France terminology in Quebec, you immediately look like a tourist. Or worse, you look like a lazy foreign corporation that doesn't care enough to localize properly. The update log is completely full of these little subtle shifts.
Like what specifically?
Well, in France, if you want to say tax included, you say TTC toots taxes comprises. But in Canada, you just say taxes incluses. It is much more direct.
Just simple and literal.
Right. And in France, you say immatriculation for company registration. In Canada, it is enregistrement.
Okay, those are vocabulary changes. What about the actual math?
Oh, the tax structure itself is completely different. You aren't dealing with the French TVA anymore. You have the GST and the HST, which in French are the TPS and TVH. So the software has to completely swap out the engine room, the actual tax calculation logic, while keeping the paint job looking generally French.
It is a really good reminder that in computer science, language and locale are two completely different variables.
Exactly. Just because the user language is set to French doesn't mean the locale is set to France.
And now we get to probably the most dramatic entry in the entire update log.
Yeah.
The country that effectively left the language, Rwanda.
This is a really stark entry to read. It is incredibly rare to see a straight-up delete command in a localization log for an entire country.
The note literally just says, deleted FR Rwanda set of books.
Gone. Entirely wiped from the 2026 active build.
Why, though?
It is history playing out in software. Following the 1994 genocide and the massive political shifts that happened in the decades after, Rwanda made a very deliberate strategic move away from the Francophone sphere of influence.
And toward the Anglophone sphere.
Yes, toward the East African community. Officially, in 2008, they formally switched their legal, educational, and business systems entirely over to English.
So they didn't just change the language, they switched from French civil law accounting to English common law accounting.
Yes, and those are two very fundamentally different philosophies of how to track money. Civil law is heavily code-based, like Oharada, where absolutely everything is written down in a master plan.
Right.
Common law is much more principles-based, like GAAP or IFRS. So the Afar Wanda setup in the software wasn't just in the wrong language anymore, it was operating in the wrong legal universe. So the developers just had to delete it.
It really hits home how software isn't just a neutral tool, it follows the flag. When the geopolitical flag changes, the code literally gets deleted.
It really does, though, as we will probably discuss later, deleted is a very relative term when it comes to enterprise databases.
Very true. Let's hit the island nations briefly before we get to the final technical deep dive. Mauritius and Comoros. Two islands neighbors in the Indian Ocean, but completely different financial systems.
Night and day. Mauritius is the big business hub. They strictly follow international IFRS standards. They basically want to be the Singapore of Africa.
So very streamlined.
Very. Their currency is the Mauritian rupee, MUR. Their VAT is just a flat 15%. It is very clean, very international. If you know how to do accounting in London or Singapore, you can drop in and do accounting in Mauritius with almost no friction.
And Comoros.
Comoros is the total outlier. They are not in OHADA. They generally follow French standards, but with wild local twists. And the VAT system is, oh boy,
complicated.
Let's just say it keeps accountants employed. They have a standard rate of 10%, a reduced rate of 5% just for water and electricity, another reduced rate of 3% for specific other items, and 0% for exports.
A 3% tax bracket. That feels oddly hyper-specific.
It creates a massive amount of work for the software logic. You need a specific hard-coded tax logic just for that one tiny 3% bucket. Because if the software misses it, the Comorian tax authority will definitely not be happy.
Wow. Let's go into the engine room now. Section 6 of the logs, the technical deep dive. We have talked a lot about human language, but now let's talk about machine language and data types. There was a specific error logged about Big Endian.
Yes, the famous error codage de caractères UTF-16 invalid Big Endian.
So I know what UTF-16 is. It is a standard text encoding format for international characters. Yeah. But what on earth is Big Endian? Honestly, it sounds like a character from Gulliver's Travels.
It actually is from Gulliver's Travels.
Wow, way. Are you serious?
I am dead serious. In the book, the Lilliputians fought a literal civil war over which end of the boiled egg you were supposed to break, the big end or the little end.
That is amazing.
And early computer scientists, being massive nerds, adopted the term. In computing, Indianness refers to the specific order in which a computer's memory stores bytes of data. Big Endian stores the most significant byte first. Little Endian stores the least significant byte first.
So is that kind of like writing a date as year, month, day versus day, month, year?
Roughly, yes. That
Yeah.
is a great analogy. The issue here was in the localization translation file itself. The French translators were being very diligent grammarians.
Okay.
They saw the error message string and decided to capitalize the words properly. They capitalized characters, which is totally fine, but they also tried to fix and format Big Endian.
Why is that a problem? Why not capitalize it?
Because Big Endian is a strict technical descriptor, it is a reserved term in computer science architecture. If you capitalize it or, God forbid, translate it into French, like Grand Bouchin or something, you completely confuse the IT guy trying to fix the server at 2 a.m.
Ah, I see. He is searching the technical documentation for Big Endian. He doesn't know what Grand Bouchin means.
Exactly. So the ironclad localization rule they had to implement was translate the human words, but keep the machine words completely raw and untouched. Don't translate the plumbing.
Speaking of human words, let's talk about visual ergonomics. The developers spent an inordinate amount of time rearranging words in the sidebar menus and reports, specifically changing fournisseurs sold versus solde de colonne.
This is all about scannability and eye tracking. In the old, unoptimized version, you might have a long list of reports in a menu that all started with the word soldes, which means balances.
So it says solde de client, then solde de fournisseur, then solde de stock.
Exactly. And the problem is your eye has to read past the first 2 or 3 words every single time just to know what report you're actually looking at.
It slows you down.
It creates cognitive friction. So the 2026 update flipped the syntax. Now it reads fournisseurs sold, meaning suppliers' balances, and clients solds.
So the most important keyword is first.
Yes. In UX design, this is called front-loading. It helps the user's eye travel straight down the report list vertically much, much faster.
It seems like such a tiny change just swapping 2 words around.
It is tiny, but when you multiply that microsecond of saved time by the thousands of times an accountant opens that menu every year, you are saving hours of collective time and frustration.
They also did some serious space-saving surgery on the interface. Code do parcelware became just code parcelware.
Dropping the do, which means of the. In modern 2026, software design sidebars are incredibly crowded. Mobile screens and tablets are frequently in play even for enterprise tools.
Every single pixel counts.
Every character counts. Code parcelware conveys the exact same functional meaning to the user, but it saves 3 valuable characters of space. Across a database of millions of records or fitting text into a tight UI sidebar, that white space is incredibly valuable. It just makes the interface look cleaner and less cluttered.
It is really amazing how much thought and debate goes into things we completely take for granted. We just casually click the button and expect it to work.
Exactly.
We don't think about the Portuguese translation of French law in Guinea-Bissau or the exact capitalization of Big Endian in an error log.
And honestly, we shouldn't have to. That is the true sign of good localization. It should be invisible. If you actively notice the localization, it probably means it is broken.
That is a great point. So bringing this all together, we started this deep dive thinking we were just going to talk about simple language translation. But we ended up touring the legal, economic, and colonial history of the entire Francophone world.
We really did. We saw how something as mundane as accounting software is effectively a mirror for human society.
It mirrors the laws like the incredibly rigid PCG system in France.
And it mirrors history like the Spanish administrative influence layered over Equatorial Guinea or the geopolitical English shift in Rwanda.
And it even mirrors culture. The delicate politeness of souhaitez-vous versus the sheer abrupt panic of canceled.
Ideally, the software acts as a buffer. It quietly absorbs all that massive complexity, the convoluted tax rates, the strict legal codes, the subtle cultural nuances, so the end user can just focus on actually running their business.
Here's a provocative thought to end on today. We talked earlier about Rwanda leaving the French system and how the FR Rwanda set of books was officially deleted from the source code.
Right, it was removed.
But in the accounting world, you keep secure backups for years. Decades sometimes.
True. You legally have to keep them for compliance and audits.
Does that mean there are hard drives in Kigali right now sitting quietly in a basement server room that still contain this deleted history?
Almost certainly.
Is that FR1 module still alive on a legacy server somewhere, perfectly preserving a legal and linguistic system that the country itself has completely abandoned?
That is fascinating to think about. Old software never really dies, it just goes offline. And in those encrypted backups, you have a perfectly frozen snapshot of exactly how that country used to think about value and money. It is literal digital archaeology just waiting to happen.
I really love that image. The ghost in the machine.
Precisely. A financial ghost.
Well, next time you open your banking app or your company's accounting software at work, take a second to actually look at the words on the screen. Look at the specific phrasing of the error messages.
Look at the buttons.
Yeah, ask yourself, why did they choose that specific word? You might just find a whole history lesson hidden right behind the submit button.
And hey, if you see transporter when you just want to make a simple pie chart, someone on their dev team definitely didn't listen to this deep dive.
Exactly. Thanks so much for listening to the deep dive today. We will catch you on the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.